This series is made possible by the generous donation of Stifel Financial and viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Where Do We Go From Here? This is a program dealing with local issues with greater than local impact. We produced 9 episodes dealing with the issue of homelessness in Nevada County and gone on to produce episodes on gun violence and gun registration and laws relating to guns. And today we are talking with Jake Fredant-Atty, a local filmmaker who has worked on the issue of climate change. And this is one of a series of issues that we're looking at throughout the year because climate change is a long-term experience that we are now acknowledging has great global consequence. It also has local consequences dealing with drought and fires, water scarcity, water conservation in our local area. So welcome, Jake, to Nevada County TV.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here.
Great.
And Jake produced a movie, one of a number of movies that he's worked on. And the name of the movie is Cross of the Moment. And we'll be showing parts of that movie interspersed into this interview. But first, so that you get to know Jake a little bit better, if you would tell us a little bit about yourself, Jake, where you grew up, what your childhood was like, and what got you into movies.
Okay. Yeah, my parents were part of the initial kind of back to the land, beatnik, 60s, dropout, and go grow your own vegetables thing. I moved with my mom to the San Juan Ridge in '73, I believe. I was 3 years old. My first 10 years, I lived without electricity, without indoor toilets, without television. We really grew up like it was the 18th century, and it was wonderful. Those were great days and great times. But I always had a connection to Los Angeles also. Both of my parents were from LA. And by high school, I moved down to LA and ended up going to college, coming back to LA after college and wanted to get into film. I was working in the family business and writing screenplays for about 10 years. And then at the end of that time, I made a low-budget independent film, a feature, with a bunch of friends, and that worked out really well. And right about that time, I got married and had a child, and I really wanted to raise my child up here in Nevada County. So sold the business, sold the house, moved up here with the family about 15 years ago, built a house out in the woods, a passive solar.
No longer with an outhouse.
With actually 2 bathrooms inside, so moving up. And electricity too, and big flat screen TVs everywhere. But
you brought the city with you.
Unfortunately, yeah. And by the time kind of all that settled down, I was ready for another film project. And it's actually the Cross of the Moment, crossofthemoment.com. What kind of inspired that, I watch the Oscars every year, like everybody else, and from my perspective, I'm like, the only intelligent people in that room are the documentary filmmakers, and I'm like, I could make a doc, why not, And I really, was like, okay, if I was going to make a doc, what would it be about, and, what's the important issues for me, and that was kind of the genesis of the movie.
So where can people find, we'll come back to this a couple of times, but where can people find that movie?
Well, it's on YouTube. I just, when I finished it, I entered some festivals and did a little of that, but you'll see when you watch the film, the nature of it, it's very low key. It's not a lot of special effects and graphics and stuff. And it didn't cost me a lot to make. It was really just a time and energy thing. And it's also pretty heady and pretty depressing and pretty intense. Sometimes I like to call it an intellectual horror movie.
Right.
But so I didn't really try to get real distribution. I just went straight online. So I've got the website, crossofthemoment.com, and it's also on YouTube. And I pretty much said anybody who wants to show this film anywhere, it's yours for the taking. And it's on a lot of websites. It's pretty easy to find online. And it gets used a lot academically. It gets used a lot in the classroom. Is really its main use.
Yeah. And we will be showing this. We have shown it in the past. We will be showing it again on Nevada County Television. It'll be available on our website as well. Great. So it's definitely accessible. It is an intellectual look at. I mean, one of the questions I have is, how did you decide who to interview and where to go? I mean, you went all over.
Yeah. So the process of the film for me was initially I wanted to. I kind of treated it as an intellectual art project, where I didn't want to have a preconceived idea of what this film was going to be. I wanted to pursue what interested me and let it kind of unfold through the filming, through the editing process, and things changed. But the initial concept was I wanted to look at kind of the intersection of science and faith, really was part of the original concept, and politics. But I wanted to look at these big picture ideas that are hard to talk about, that don't get really addressed so much because they're so big and they're controversial, and really I wanted to look at things that people didn't want to look at, answers that people didn't want to hear, pretty much.
I don't think humans are going to go extinct. We're a resourceful bunch, and at least the richest among us will figure out ways to keep going. But that doesn't seem to me to be the issue. We're going to take a lot of DNA out along the way. The biologists think half the species on the planet could go out this century. And we're going to do in incredible numbers of the poorest and most vulnerable people on Earth, most of whom have done nothing to contribute to the problem we now face.
If you're a family member of the 5 million people a year who die early deaths because of climate change, you're already feeling it.
No, I don't think it's going to be too late for humans. Humans are an incredibly tenacious species with all kinds of ways of getting by, and they are all over the planet, living, in some far places and in some very promising environments, and doing sometimes fairly well. So no, that's not what we're going to. We're not going to lose human beings, unfortunately. What we're going to lose is a lot of species, of other species, and a lot of stuff in the ocean. And then things will, you've read about the 6 extinctions, or the 5 previous extinctions. They all came back. Even the ones where the life on Earth was reduced to some fairly simple organisms, they do come back. So no, it's not an end of humanity, but it is a reduction of and a loss maybe of a lot of technology and information and science that might come about if things got really weird.
So I knew I wanted to talk about climate change, and I knew I wanted to talk about capitalism, and I also wanted to talk about the Fermi paradox, which I somehow felt like was related. And again, I was originally going to talk about the issue of God and religion and whether a lot of these scientists had some kind of faith that was, but as through the process I realized that wasn't going to really fit in. So then what I would do is I would just, I took Fermi's paradox and I...
Why don't you just, for the audience, just briefly explain that?
Yeah. Well, Fermi's paradox is really the issue of why are we alone, or apparently alone, why there's not aliens visiting us. But the thing about Fermi's paradox most people don't understand is it's really a question of time. It's the issue of, you know, in the 10 billion years that the solar system or the galaxy, the universe existed, specifically the galaxy existed before Earth, before we came into place. How come no other alien species colonized the galaxy? Because you can say, well, based on where we've come and how fast we've come, that maybe in another 10,000 years or 50,000 years or 1,000,000 years, if we don't destroy ourselves, we should be able to colonize the galaxy. We should be able to spread out. There's no...
Right, and then 10 billion years, there's plenty of time.
If alien life was common, somebody somewhere would have colonized the galaxy. And the fact that it hasn't indicates that alien life is probably pretty uncommon. And then it's a question of why. Do species destroy themselves, or do they just never actually appear?
Right. The question came up, I think, a number of times, whether or not we're special, whether this is a special planet in, you know, in a universe that is huge and practically infinite. Why are we alone, seemingly alone?
Yeah. You know, the universe is infinite, the galaxy is not infinite, and I doubt if species are, you know, traveling between galaxies. So, you know, we can narrow our scope a little bit, but it seems like we're pretty alone here in the galaxy. But so, you know, the perfect example of how the movie evolved, you know, I really came into it, well, climate change is the reason. That was in my head. Yeah. But as I, you know, looked into Fermi's paradox and some of the answers that are out there, I came to rare earth theory. So in the movie, Fermi's paradox is kind of a prologue, and that transitions very nicely into rare earth theory, which is all the reasons that life exists on the planet that most people aren't really aware of. And the more you learn about that, like things like the magnetic field and the position of the moon, the creation of the moon, the composition of the core of the Earth, which are all plate tectonics, all these things make Earth unique among the planets we know, you know, in the solar system, certainly. But even as we, you know, right now we're getting all these planets that are being identified in other solar systems. But if you really, you know, they say, oh, this is habitable. It's not really habitable. We have no idea if that planet has plate tectonics or a, you know, a magnetic field that's protecting it.
Atmospheres,
so, atmosphere, all those things. But so, you know, rare earth theory was something I didn't know about, and it seemed super important, and it became the second chapter. But interestingly, the guys that came up with rare earth theory, especially Peter Ward, is a giant climate change activist. He's a climate scientist, and he's very concerned about climate change. He's one of the, you know, featured people in the movie, but so again, it just kind of transitioned right into the next topic. And the chapter on capitalism and stuff, again, I had a feeling, you know, I knew this was important, but as I looked deeper into it, it really changed my own views and shaped the film. And
so diving into that, it's really a question of consumerism and how much we are tapping into the resources of the planet, how much the planet can support in terms of our custom of consuming and overconsumption and conservation of whatever resources. So you might want to elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, ultimately, you know, my motto at the end of the filming, and, you know, maybe a year after being done, when I'd really digested everything, and my motto now, or my saying is, you know, climate change is the symptom, capitalism is the disease, eco-socialism is the cure. And from my perspective, you cannot separate climate change and capitalism. Capitalism is a system of belief that says competition is the solution to everything. It's, you know, Darwinism, economic Darwinism. It works really well for the winners and so bad for everybody else.
Right.
I think that's, you know, when you're making these types of films or when you're talking about climate change, a lot of people aren't willing to go that far. But in my view, there is no solution to climate change. It doesn't address capitalism.
And when you talk about eco-socialism, it sounds alarms to people because they hear socialism. Can you translate that into something that is understandable and not a soundbite?
Right. Well, that's the next movie, so hang on to that thought.
Okay.
I think eco-socialism is something that we're still trying to define. I mean, it has a definite, in Europe it means one thing right now, and that's an evolution of socialism, really taking Marx-style socialism and expanding it to include environmental issues. But in America, I think we're really coming at it more from the environmentalist aspect and just a recognition that you can't separate environmental issues from social issues. And so whatever the solution for one is going to be the solution for both, and we need to figure out what that is and what society would look like. But
it's going to be tough because to have a conversation on socialism, we can look at Europe, and I think that they're definitely ahead of us in the issue of looking at the environment and how to combine the environment with the economy in a way that is kinder to the planet and more sustainable.
Yeah. I don't think socialism is this dirty word that it was 20 years ago in America anymore. I think that some 30% of people under 50 identify as socialists now, or as democratic socialists. I think Bernie Sanders' campaign really made that word acceptable again in the States. And there's light socialism and heavy socialism. Socialism isn't necessarily the same as communism. But it's just the general idea that we have a social contract. We're not just all fighting each other to get to the top of the heap.
Great. Well, and it comes to my belief, which is often that it's crisis that drives change. We're sort of on the front end of climate change. We're acknowledging it, seeing it, experiencing it, certainly locally here in terms of drought, fire, elsewhere storms, hurricanes, melting of ice, raising of the ocean. So we're seeing the sort of the consequences, and yet it hasn't reached a level of temperature rise that has caused alarm, at least not on a global scale. And I'm just concerned that I know I'm sort of moving quickly here in the interview, but I'm concerned about what your intention was in making the movie. Did you feel like this is an educational process for yourself and others? Do you hope to reach enough people that will change opinions or motivate?
Part of my impetus, was a kind of dissatisfaction with the climate change documentaries that were being made, where there was almost too much emphasis on trying to educate like teenagers or children or something, instead of a real a deep dialogue about how we fix this. And I think the movie is an hour and a half long. If you spend too much time on the science, if you spend too much time showing videos of melting icebergs and dying polar bears, you're not going to have any time to talk about what's left, which are the real issues and potential solutions. Al Gore made a great movie on climate change. There's been many other great films, but I wanted to go deep into the angst and just the I don't know what you call it.
Yeah, without giving anything away, because I think it's a very provocative movie. I mean, you have to think about everything that's being said, and a lot of issues are raised. Did you come to any conclusions? You say eco-socialism is the cure, but there would be a lot of steps between now and any kind of cure. Do you see any relief along the way, other than total breakdown?
No, Lou, the truth is, making the movie was a very depressing. I was in a funk for about a year or two after that.
Yeah.
I mean, we finished the film in 2015, so I don't feel that way now, but it's because I have internalized that depression. I am what is called a doomer. I believe that eco-socialism is the solution, but we're not going to get there. I think that our economic system is much stronger than our political system. I think capitalism is stronger than democracy. I think that's what we're seeing all over the globe right now, is the failure of democracy. You've got, unelected people running Russia, China, Brazil, maybe the United States. I mean, things are not working anymore. And climate change denial, what's going on with Exxon, what's going on with, gutting the EPA. All these things are a result of the oligarchy, really, of just capital, of wealth, just making our political decisions. So I don't think climate change is really an issue of education anymore. I think if you really look, everybody knows it's happening, except for people who are paid to say that it's not happening. The science is not that complex. It's a slow burn, and I think we're at the beginning of that. I wish that we had some way to say, hey, everybody wake up, we've got to work together and fix this problem before civilization collapses, but I don't expect that to happen. And not only that, from my perspective, the sooner civilization collapses, the greater chance we have as a species to survive.
Yeah. Well, that point is made in the movie as well, and along with it's not quite as bleak as you're mentioning, because the experts that you interviewed did point to survival, even though it would be a lot of extinction of species, and a great reduction in the planet's population. I think that maybe 1 billion was the number that people felt could be supported in a much different lifestyle. And that was left a little vague as to what that would look like, feel like. It would be certainly less consumption and greater attention paid to resources.
Fossil fuels are the engines of our economy, and the engines of our growth, and the engines of our population explosion too.
The problem in its most immediate form is carbon. Coal and oil and gas release carbon into the atmosphere, and the molecular structure of CO2 traps heat that would otherwise radiate back out to space. I think that a different way of looking at it is to understand that probably fossil fuel is more important than ideology in the development of the last few hundred years.
The stakes are very high. So this is the climate crisis is the greatest threat that humanity has ever faced.
People often talk about global warming, climate change. Today's civilization was built for the climate of the early 20th century, but that climate is changing, all right? And the population growth has been explosive. And so probably civilization as we know it is unsustainable.
My editors don't want anything about global warming, and they certainly don't want anything depressing about global warming. People don't want to hear it.
Science tends to be fairly conservative in what it says is true, because you have to, it has to stand up to peer review, it has to stand up to other people doing the same research and making sure they get the same answer. It has to be defended very rigorously. So the fact is that these big assessments like the IPCC report tend to be fairly conservative in what they say is true.
You guys are from California, so you have some sense of what's going on, in one small corner of the world where we're seeing drought on a scale that we haven't seen before, for instance. And that kind of thing just gets more and more and more common and violent as the temperature goes up 2 degrees Celsius, 3 degrees, 4 degrees. That's what we're on path for now. that's a world where we probably can't have civilizations like the ones we're used to having, because we won't be able to depend on raising food in the ways we do now. And our cities, most of them built on the coasts, will be highly vulnerable, and it'll be a difficult, maybe impossible place to live.
With a 4 degrees Celsius temperature range, we can expect the Sahara Desert in North Africa to jump across the Mediterranean into Central Europe, resulting in summer temperatures of 120 degrees, a typical day. With the 3 degrees of warming, we could expect the Brazilian rainforest to burn down and turn to desert, with probably superstorm hurricanes with the capability to obliterate cities occurring from time to time.
Though those are the things we sort of notice on a day-to-day basis, the kind of bigger, more profound mess are what's happening at the whole system level. I mean, both the Arctic and the Antarctic are now melting at prodigious rates, and the oceans are 30% more acidic than they were 40 years ago. We're talking about the biggest physical features on planet Earth, and they're essentially breaking.
In the last 150 years or so, sea level's gone up by about 20 centimeters, which is about 8 inches. Now that doesn't sound like a lot when you're standing there on the beach and the waves are crashing over your feet, but you have to remember that's 8 inches times 2/3 the area of the planet. So it's a huge volume of water that's been added.
People don't understand is how fast sea level is going to rise. Whether it happens 3 feet, whether it happens at the end of this century or even the middle of the next century is irrelevant. 3 feet affects unbelievably the amount of food that can be produced.
It doesn't necessarily have to happen all at once. Just like Hurricane Sandy in New York, of course, that wasn't caused by global warming, but it was exacerbated by global warming. Of the 18, 19 feet of storm surge, a foot or so was global warming. Now, that's not a huge impact yet, but if we're looking at 5, 6 feet of sea level rise in the next 100 years, it will begin to become very, very important.
You know, my feeling is that we can choose what is possible, or it will be chosen for us, you know, in the sense that if we don't act smartly and quickly, it's going to happen and it's going to overwhelm us.
Right.
And then what choice will we have, and who will be in charge?
Yeah.
And what will life look like under those circumstances?
Yeah.
That to me is a much bleaker picture than trying to take some control of the situation and act wisely.
Yeah. Well, it's such a tricky situation because it's almost like, you know, it's like we've come of age as a species and we're adults now. And up till now, we've been able to kind of do whatever we want, and the ramifications, you know, maybe affect somebody on the other side of the globe. But now climate change is this thing where we really all have to work together. Yeah. And for you or me or any individual to make a bunch of choices doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. You know, we need a government, we need rules and laws in a society that is geared towards this one idea of surviving, of, you know, working as a biological system for the whole globe, you know.
Cooperation versus competition.
That's what it comes down to, really.
And it's the kind of, it's interesting. I just finished a book with the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu having a dialogue. It's called The Book of Joy. And, you know, I needed it to sort of get me through this series on climate. But the idea is that we actually are more wired for cooperation than we are for competition. So there is hope in our species, even though what we see in conflict is a lot of competition. We haven't, maybe the news needs to be geared more towards how we can better cooperate. And, you know, there is this sense, you know, I think even though you might be a doomsdayer and I can see the dark side of life as well, there is hope. I mean, there is, the other shoe hasn't fallen.
Maybe it's falling.
And that if we give up hope, then I guess the question I wanted to ask of you is, now that you have created this movie and you've processed and digested, how have you chosen to live your life out, knowing you have a daughter, one child, and how does life look like for you on a daily basis? How do you deal with it?
Just hypocritical like everybody else, I mean, I have an electric car. I have a house on the ridge. It's completely off grid, but I still have a diesel generator to back everything up.
Yeah.
My next film, which I've started to work on now, is what is eco-socialism, and is really I'm trying to envision whatever that solution is, because I think that's still being defined, and I want to be part of that. And I think what we need is something concrete that says, this is what life would look like under that. Everybody's on public transportation. Yeah, you don't have a giant TV, you only have a teeny TV if you're lucky, or I don't know. That's what I'm looking for too now, and I'm going to go out and find it.
Well, my life experience, which extends a little bit beyond yours now, is I've come to some conclusions which I think are at least valid for the moment, and that is that what I see is a movement towards decentralization, towards community, which is much more cooperative. We can see it here with our own community. It's a matter of community empowerment. And if we can take charge of our homeless population, of our gun violent population, of our water the water conservation issues, we have a better chance of creating a model that is sustainable and can be duplicated elsewhere. Well, that's it for this interview. I want to thank you, Jake, for being here and making time for it in your movie scheduling. The series on climate change will continue, and will continue to address the kinds of choices and opinions that are going to be aired. So please continue to watch us. You can see us on YouTube, Where Do We Go From Here, NCTV. You can go to nevadacountytv.org and go to the playlist and watch the series on homeless or gun legislation or climate change. And there will be an ongoing series throughout the year. So thanks for watching. Oh, by the way, if you like what you're seeing and you want to support it, go to nevadacountytv.org, donate. That's how these shows happen. This is local public access TV that's aired globally. Thanks for watching.